Understanding the technology that powers the money is essential. Knowing the business drivers that inspire how the money is made is crucial. Bridging the gap between the mind of the technologist and the mind of the business is monumental. That is what TBF is all about. Let's start this never-ending conversation. It's time.
Happy Friday. Welcome back to another episode of the Tech Behind FinTech. Really excited for today's episode, how FinTech startups go from ideas to market. I have with me, joining me from Kunai, our esteemed guest, Ruan Pethiyagoda. How are you doing today, Ruan?
Awesome, Namdi. It's a good Friday. Happy Friday to you and to everyone listening in.
So, look, today's episode is going to be an awesome show. If you ever wondered how to take an idea, a concept in your head, and bring it to the market in the fintech industry, this could apply to other startups as well. Before we get into the show, I want to introduce my guest. I'm going to read his bio, and then we're going to just hop into it straight away because it's a lot of ground to cover, and I want to make sure all your questions get answered and all of mine too. So I'm really curious about this topic. So let's get into it. Ruan Pethiyagoda, as a strategic advisor to Fortune 500 financial services company, Ruan has a wealth of experience in helping businesses transform their operations through digital innovation. His expertise includes cybersecurity, AI, machine learning, product strategy, customer experience design, data analytics, compliance, and anti-money laundering. Ruan has a deep understanding of the challenges and opportunities that businesses face in today's digital landscape. He currently works as a chief strategy officer for Kunai, a boutique consultancy delivering digital transformations in fintech for bigger banks. Welcome to the show. So, you know what? I want to just do it a little different in this episode. Usually we cover the news, but it's a lot to cover, and we have a fixed amount of time. So I just want to jump into it. What is that journey, right? Like, describe it to me. You know, someone has an idea, a concept. They wrote it down on the napkin at your favorite coffee shop. Now they want to take that concept and bring it to market. What's involved with that?
Yeah, of course. So the traditional entrepreneur's journey we're pretty familiar with, and just take tech and leave out the fin. You've got an idea, you need to build something technologically, you're thinking of something different, something that does not exist, that has not been done, as well as the idea you have in your head. You've got a napkin sketch, you've got a vision in your head, you've got to get it out of your head, you've got to design what the user experience is that you have in mind that's going to be a little different to whatever is out there now. You need to have the technical ability to get this engineered in a way that's going to be initially just showing users what it would mean to use your product in production. And then you've got to be able to build it in a way that scales and is able to run even if you get very popular. So that's the general journey you encounter with a regular technology company. The big difference in finance is the reason we have the word fintech right now is because we're in an era where just the concept of money, the way we use or transact value, is just changing so much faster and more fundamentally than it ever has before. And what that means is you have to move in this space extraordinarily fast before the market leaves you behind. So if you think of how long it would take a software startup to get to market in the 90s, it would take years. You have these long development cycles of potentially 1, 2, 3 years. And then in the dot-com era, with the web taking off, you had a lot of companies cutting that down to maybe 9, 10 months, under a year. A lot of fintech startups now, especially consumer startups, have to be able to get to market very quickly before the market itself changes. So when you're thinking of a payment technology or mobile wallet, or digitization and things like that. The folks who uh, beat Visa and MasterCard to the concept of mobile wallets in other markets um, had to get as entrenched as they could before MasterCard and Visa and Apple Pay, Google Wallet, and everybody was going to catch up with them. Because you're always going to have, if your idea is successful, incumbents are coming for you as well. They will move slower than you, but they will get there and they will bring their market potential with them. And unlike a lot of other spaces, especially payments, there's huge consolidation. If you're going up against Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover, um, you need to get a very, very good head start in terms of getting customers to do something else. If you are going up against traditional banks as a neobank or thinking of a new way to get people to um, store cash, do investments, anything like that, you've got to build your product way quicker than um, the incumbents can, but also cautiously enough that you don't get on the wrong side of regulators, because it's a heavily regulated space in a way that you don't have to worry about if you are building a social network, for example.
So, me, let's dive into that, right? So, you mentioned a
Yeah.
couple of things that I want to dive into. The first thing you talked about the '90s, right? That's back when you have this great idea, you have all sorts of requirements, you build it in stealth for like, I don't know, a year plus two, maybe it comes out and you have a 50-50 shot at customers liking it or hating it, right? So that era we moved past, books like The Lean Startup came out. The ideas of failing fast. Let's
Mm-hmm.
let's let's iterate. Whole concept of MVP came out, right?
Yeah.
Of minimal viable product. Let's
Mm-hmm.
let's build something, right? See how it works in the market, get that user feedback, and iterate, iterate, iterate.
Yeah.
So, you know, let's just talk through those shifts, right?
Sure.
In terms of where we're at today and how, looking at the past with the lens that you painted, right? And let's talk through that. How does it work from
Yeah.
the
So
from the from the
just
ideation aspect?
yeah, of course. So imagine, for example, think of a neobank like Chime, right? Imagine trying to start Chime in the 90s, right?
Mhm.
Before mobile phones, before the quick uh, platforms that we have to now build apps very quickly. Imagine just Chime as just a web version of what we do on our phones now, right? As mobile phones are getting into it, think of like the first versions of Uber and trying to build a neobank around those technologies. You're going to have massive hurdles at that time because of the regulatory need for all your communications to be secure. Those security rules have been around for a long time, right? So there were entire domains of applications and startups that were simply not possible in that 90s era because of the lack of platforms that were available. So now, if you think of the lean startup concept now, where you want to get to MVP, you want to iterate, you want to go through a few loops and validate ideas in front of customers in fintech, you have to do that in chunks that are meaningfully thought through enough that, again, you're not going to get on the wrong side of regulators, right? So if you want, what is the MVP for a neobank? It is a fully functioning, at least single um, banking service that is legal and usually backed by some kind of a sponsor bank who is you're acting as a front end for, right? But you've got to offer at least a single product, very well thought through, um, far beyond, say, the first iteration of Facebook in terms of how many things you have to get right and be compliant about. And there is probably one of the biggest lessons today for fintech startups, which is a lot of folks, there's an entire ecosystem of startups that are just companies that are serving people who want to build something new in fintech and taking on entire parts of the stack for you so you can just focus on the one thing you're doing differently. So as a very common example of this. If your fintech startup idea involves connecting to consumers connecting to their other bank accounts, you wouldn't dream of building that yourself today. You would connect with Plaid. You would use Plaid or something to integrate that functionality for you without trying to build it yourself. You, in the same way that neobanks are not going to try and register and charter a bank to get started, they're going to work with someone like an Evolve to be behind them and just focus on the technology that they think they can do differently, the different user experience they can provide, and how they're going to work around some new bit of functionality. So it's the same lean startup concepts that apply, but you have to know what the single thing is you're bringing in that's different, the first hypothesis you want to test, and you don't have the same rapid iteration cycles that you'd have with more flexible products, with your UI perhaps, but not with the core offering. So you've got to be relatively sure, you've got to have some domain expertise, and have the right people in place to not waste development cycles, which are precious in fintech.
Sounds like, right? The ecosystem is extremely important. Understanding that ecosystem of who you can partner with so you don't have to basically reinvent the wheel. But that
Yep.
core offering that differentiates you from the market, that has to be well thought out. But
Yes.
so in terms of like an MVP concept, if you have five different services, and we're using neobanks as an example, if you have five different
Sure.
services that this is in your roadmap,
Mhm.
for in this case for a neobank, the MVP will be that one, but that one, and hearing what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, if I heard it
Mhm.
correctly, that one has to be fully laid out. Is that
It's got to be
accurate?
fully laid out. It's got to be fully baked. The functionality has to be compliant. You've got to be sure that if you're accepting customer deposits, for example, if it's a savings account, you've got to be sure that the money the customers put in gets in, that the interest gets calculated, that the core banking functionality, the ledger and so on, is working. You don't want to have to build all of that yourself. Your idea is certainly not going to be a different way of, say, calculating interest. You want to avoid building that from first principles and focus on just the one thing that you're offering that's slightly different.
So you need to really, I mean, so another thing, so then it goes back to the ecosystem, is really understanding
Sure.
what are those reusable components, right? How does it work? I've heard of some situations in which, in various within fintech, but it can be in, new payment wallets. It can be in the I saw an example recently. I talked to someone, the marijuana, not free, legal marijuana, but dealing with those, some banks might not want to partner with you. Depending. So how do you go about getting those partners, or getting to use those components? What's that process like?
Yep. So a lot of them are, again, dealing with regulated environments themselves. The difference is that you have these companies that specialize in handling those parts of the stack. So, for example, um, a very common one is across tech, not just fintech, is accepting credit card payments, right? Everyone, developer friendly wise, you would think Stripe is the first thing that comes to mind. I will use Stripe if I'm accepting credit card payments. Not necessarily the cheapest way of doing it, but certainly the fastest way to get online. And you need to know what the components are that go into your application and then be able to understand the differences between the players on there. They're very well, um, they're easy to find. They have venture money that makes them easy to find. You need to have the technical knowledge to know the vocabulary, the terms, the alternatives, and to be able to map out your solution, your entire application, and think, imagine you're drawing a map of all of the different components. You've got to be able to draw boxes around some of them and say, I am not building that. I'm going to use Plaid. I am not building this. I'm going to use Marqeta here. My bank layer is going to be Evolve. My login, my authentication is going to be Okta or Auth0. I am not going to roll my own encryption. I'm going to use these other frameworks instead. And throughout the stack, you need to have the right level of technical depth in your either your founding team or your partners. Kunai helps. A lot of companies do this from the very get-go when they're still looking for their technical partners. You have to know how to make what the universe of options is and to make the right decision depending on the amount of flexibility you want to have and the nuances of your use case.
So a question on that, based because you just brought up Stripe. So
Mm-hmm.
I have an idea for a fintech. I want to
Yeah.
accept credit card payments. We're going to integrate with Stripe. Usually, with credit card payments and things like that, you need PCI DSS from a compliance framework. Can I leverage the PCI DSS that Stripe has and just say, okay, I'm integrating with them, so I don't need it? How does that work?
Yeah, so PCI compliance is about protecting cardholder information. And if you never have cardholder information on your systems or anything that can be used to translate into cardholder information, PCI compliance does not come up for you. Now, how do you accept card payments without having cardholder information? That's where Stripe comes in. They take care of that problem for you, right? You have to abide by their rules. You've got to be a legitimate merchant in ways that they verify, but you use their systems and warrant that you're not storing anything you're not supposed to store, that everything that is being transited is transmitted securely and compliantly. And now you don't need to touch any of the data that would cause overhead for you and require you to get levels of compliance that would otherwise slow you down from getting to market.
Brilliant. So now that goes into your data architecture. So let's give a high level walkthrough of that entire process, right? From
Yeah.
idea to production. Let's just get into each stage. So we identified we have an idea. We have this new hot fintech idea. We know the core services we're going to offer. We're like, okay, this can really work. Next step.
So now you've got to describe the product that you just ideated. In an agile process, we would break it down into what are called epics and user stories. And a user story is exactly what it sounds like. It is the story that we would tell of a user interacting with your product. And every single thing that your product does that you have in mind can be broken down into and told in terms of a user story. Logging in to your product, if it's got to be authentication driven, is a user story. Logging out, if there's multiple ways you can do it, by typing in a username and password, by getting a code back, by using your fingerprint, those are all stories. You break the entire app down into stories. They don't even have to be interactive functions. Finding out your balance if you're offering an account might be as simple as just opening the app, and the story is over as soon as it started. The app opens, you see your balance, end of story. But you think through all of the stories you want against the current story. What would the user story be without what you're bringing to the table? And a lot of that is writing, a lot of that is creative work. No one's touched a line of code yet or written any application architecture or anything technical. And you get to that point and you've designed a product in terms of what is going to happen, what is the user experience going to be. You've got to translate that into designs. Like, what are they going to see? What exactly are they going to touch? How are they going to know and intuit the interface that you're providing for them? What are the ways in which they're not going to be confused? When you're thinking of a consumer application in particular, this concept of churn is a huge concept where if you don't know what you're doing, if the app is not clear, if it's confusing, you will just not use it. You'll get distracted and go off and do something else. So you've got to design the experience you have in mind in such a way that that is not going to happen, that a user is going to intuitively and delightfully do what you want them to do in the app. And once you see that visually, once you know how that's reflected in either the mobile application or the web application you want to provide, it could be even a text message interface, whatever the story is of how the user is going to interact with what you're building. Once you know that, now you've got to look at what is the code that needs to be written, what is the software that needs to come online and be published, on what platforms to make that audio-visual experience a reality. And sticking with the neobank example, you think, okay, I've got this idea of a banking app I've imagined. You log in, you can see your balances, you can maybe apply for different types of accounts, you can bring your money in, say from your other bank accounts, from crypto, you can apply for credit cards, whatever it is, you're thinking of how you're going to now develop these features. What is novel? And ideally, you have one or two things that are novel that you've got to build and do very differently to anybody else. And everything else, wherever possible, you try to integrate what somebody else has done cost effectively for two reasons. One, you want to save time, and two, you want to assume that the part that you have thought of very, very deeply and carefully, and with the drive that led you to start a company around that idea, you have to trust that for these other components, other people have, in the same way, thought about those things very deeply and very carefully, such that they build successful companies around those ideas. And in any case where you're not worried about being locked in to a particular service or provider in a way that could be dangerous to your own potential, you again just plug in those components that you can swap around if you change your mind or you want to suddenly build another thing yourself. But you collaborate before you compete wherever you can with each of those components. Again, what this does is it helps you to bring something into the hands of your users as quickly as you possibly can. To your example of if you're accepting credit card payments, you either use a Stripe or a similar provider, or Braintree or something, or you're building all of that yourself in a PCI compliant way. Option one is way quicker. So you get through the building of this as quickly as you can. You have got to do some conscious regulatory checks to make sure you're compliant in terms of laws you may or may not know about, depending on the jurisdiction you're operating in. And then you test with trusted users. You look at the experience. You see what needs to change. There will always be something that needs to change. And then you put it out there and see how customers are using it. Ideally, you've built in ways to monitor what your customers are doing, what's confusing them, and you're constantly working to fix whatever might be slowing them down, whatever might be frustrating them, causing confusion, or maybe any errors or bugs you didn't catch in QA. And
So,
then you just keep going
question.
and repeating. Yep.
So, question on that, right? So let's take it back to the beginning. What you just said. So we went from idea, we went to user stories, right?
Yep.
Who's involved in that? What are the profiles of people that are involved in the user story creation? And for those, just to give some background, we're talking about an agile methodology. They have user stories, and user stories are grouped into epics. Ruan mentioned that earlier, and so forth. And this is another way to project manage getting something out. So it's a methodology around it, and that's what we're talking about. You can Google agile methodology. This is the first time you're hearing about it. So with the user stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who's usually the type of roles involved with that task?
Well, the name gives it away as well. You want to have some folks involved who are going to be the heroes of the story are the users. You want to have somebody involved who can represent the mind frame, the interests, the incentives of the users themselves. And often you'll have somebody with a product vision, a high level a thinker who says, I want this to be true. This is how the world should work. And they may not necessarily be the person who can take that vision and break it down into the elements that are necessary to get you to that point. So you need either product owners, product designers, people who have the experience with breaking down like very high level visions into the series of micro experiences. That comes with where people who've worked in startups get this skill set, people who have had design training have this skill set. There's entire consultancies like, IDEO is a current one, that companies like that are Frog Design, who have people who are specialized in just pure user design when you have challenges. And of course, a lot of startups just do this themselves. A lot of founders have this innate skill because they've been around for long enough to see how it's done. But it's not a technical requirement at this point. You don't necessarily need an engineer. You're not thinking about programming languages or frameworks or anything like that. You're thinking just in terms of simple sentences in uh, basic English or whatever the language is, spoken language, on what you want to happen. These can be non-technical people who just understand how people think and what people want at that stage.
I mean, I think that's an important point that you just mentioned, and I want to kind of drill in that because a lot of people will feel that once they have the idea, they immediately need engineers or developers. What you're saying is you don't need that initially. It's really conceptual and more product vision. So you need those types of roles, and usually the person that has the idea or the concept may have some background in said industry or said vertical to add that level of expertise. Does that sound accurate?
That's accurate in almost every case and the only caveat I'd give you is if you need to know whether something is possible or not, then you might need some technical advice. But that's rarer and rarer these days as we have been expanding the frontier of what is possible so quickly. So, for example, 6 months ago, if you thought, I want to build an app that's going to give me investment advice, it's going to sound like a person, but I want it to be AI driven. You might have needed an engineering mind at the early stages to tell you, hey, this is what can be done. 3 months from now, we're going to be seeing, there's this thing called GPT-4 on the horizon, which is going to blow everyone's mind. We can just presume that you'd have this. But in most cases, we have an idea. We have very good ideas of what's possible. So once that uncertainty is off the table, now you can leave engineering out until you figured out what you want to be true.
Amazing stuff. So, all right, I have some questions I have around that, and this is just more technical around
Yep.
the introducing security. At what stage do you introduce security? Because one school of thought is that whole shift left concept and introducing security in the user story so you can start really threat modeling. What are your thoughts around that?
So fraud prevention is probably one of the holy grails of this entire area. The concept of we are secure and you have peace of mind when you're dealing with us is one that is uh, one of the strongest moats that the incumbent, especially payment networks, have versus say anything that touches crypto or new payment methods that people are less familiar with. And there is no reason today not to think about security first and just to take for granted that you are going to bake in um, enough security thinking into your app, into your idea, to give users peace of mind from day one. So if you were building any kind of a financial application that was going to be allowing users to move money from here or there, and you wanted to be able to detect fraudulent use, right? 5 years ago, if you wanted to do that, you would have to think of how you're going to build all of this technology, the security technology, into your app that is going to tell you whether someone is using it fraudulently. Is this the same person? Do I need to verify their fingerprint? Do I need to check how they're typing to make sure that it's the same person that they type a different way? It was just not possible without slowing you down in ways that, we talked about being undesirable. But today, there's companies, one that comes to mind in San Francisco is Sardine.ai, that just do this and nothing else. You integrate Sardine into your app, it'll watch how your users are typing, it'll see what they're entering, and give you a very high chance of detecting fraudulent activity in your application, and make it less likely that you're going to have um, like security related concerns to do with fraud. And they do this in a number of ways that you don't even really need to think about. You just think, okay, I want to prevent fraud. I'm going to throw this in. How hard is it to throw in? Not hard. There's easy documentation. Your initial engineering team can bake it in trivially. And with every area, with login, say, authentication and security for login, this is something most entrepreneurs just do not need to think about today. Even if they're building most of it themselves using open source tools, there are libraries that handle getting user data from you to your servers securely without you having to build or rewrite any of it. And these tools all use universally industry accepted um, and compliant methods of like taking care of security. So especially in fintech, uh, security is just something you just have. There's no good reason it should be an afterthought today.
It's great. We have to take a small break. So, in our effort to support the fintech community, what we've been doing on our show is offering new startups the opportunity to we profile them from free. So, we have one for today. We're going to profile real quick, and then we're going to come back into our show. So our featured company of the week is Predictiva. So Predictiva is an AI fintech company that develops and uses state-of-the-art machine learning algorithms to autonomously trade the financial markets. Predictiva creates autonomous trading systems, which means that the solutions perform all steps from collecting data to deciding the best possible action, that it executes that action with the broker. Predictiva was recently named FinTech Startup of the Year by Startup Awards. Predictiva just finished a crowdfunding campaign last quarter and are currently closing a seed round with a 25 mil pre-money valuation. Website is predictiva.co.uk. Featured company of the week. All right, back to our show. So we have the user stories, and then you mentioned design. So can we talk about the design aspect?
Yeah, for sure. So when people think of design, often they're thinking in terms of how they want something to look. They see a design that they like, see, oh, I want my app to look like this. I want to take these ideas and I want this font, or I want this spacing, I want this effect when people are scrolling. And that is usually the path to many rabbit holes, and also making any serious designer run away from your team. Because the way that product designers and UI designers actually think about design, converting those user stories into design, is they start with, how do I make this intuitive? How do I make it so that a user can fill in the blank and understand what they're meant to do without having to think or get confused? And that is a very careful iterative process. Where should this button go? Like, what is the prior experience that this person is coming from? What have they used in the past? What are their demographics? What other experiences would they relate to when they open this application? What are they used to, and how do you nudge them towards the behavior that is frankly going to be new and uncommon to them? You're trying to make them do something they haven't done before. um, Stepping away from fintech for a sec, think of the early days of Uber when you would book a car using text messages. That was design. Somebody had to design that user experience, right? Like, you couldn't control the font of the text messages on a user's phone, um, or the sound that was made when the message came through. Those are not things in your control. What's in your control is, what do you say in the message? What can the user say to you? And how do you process back and forth between them in a chat format? And how do you make that feel like booking a cab in a way that's similar enough that users don't get confused, and but in a way that's different enough that you're impressing them? And that is a needle that designers are trying to thread whenever they're given something different that they have to build that hasn't been built before. They're going to try, at least at the get-go, to keep as much familiar to the user as possible, just to reduce confusion and churn. There's very rare counterexamples to that in fintech in particular, where when it comes to receiving, sending, using money or value, we have a lot of habits. They start from when we first go to a supermarket, when we first swipe a credit card, first check out online. These are all things that we've now gotten ingrained like rituals in our minds as to how these things are supposed to work. And for someone who has a novel idea, it's got to be just novel enough in terms of what is designed for the user to do, that it piques their attention, but not so novel that it just confuses them and makes them run away. Your tolerance for novelty for most consumer users is a lot lower in fintech than it's going to be in most other areas, low stakes areas of their life.
I mean, it's interesting you say that, because if we look at our apps, especially the ones transferring payments, whether it's Venmo, Cash App,
Yeah,
they look similar. Obviously, I mean, they have branding that's unique to them, but in terms of core functionality, we intuitively know, okay, put this in here and we're going to send money, right?
right.
So so that's a template. So it plays into what you just described. And what's interesting, so we have the user stories, we have the design. Obviously we need some sort of, based on what you're saying, not just people who can have graphic skills. It's UI, user interface and experience, right? We need that expertise to really understand that intuitive nature of the development. Of the final product. So when are we going to get into the systems architecture, the actual engineering side, where you have to now architect this and understand what language you're going to use, where you're going to deploy it, at what point are we starting that
Sure.
service, that
There's a
process of the
there's a
service?
lot of decisions that have to be made. They start to happen in parallel to when you've got your user stories baked out. In terms of the architecture, if you think about if it's a mobile app you're building, decision number one, are you going to build for Android or iOS, or are you going to build for both at the same time in a hybrid way? Um, Initial decision you've got to make, you've got to think of the factors that will influence, just starting with that decision that a lot of folks will understand. Where are my first users going to be? What are they all on one platform or another? Are they split between them? The first group I'm going to go after. If they are all iPhone users, you would start with a focus on iOS. If they're split between the two, you've got to seriously decide, do I pick one of the platforms just to get going quickly, or do I need to go with a hybrid like web application approach or one of these frameworks that let me build for both? And there's a lot of thinking you can do. You can look at the thinking of others. So Nubank, for example, world's largest neobank, is an example of a company that has published their decision-making framework for how they decided on the technology behind building their mobile application. And they publish a very thorough deck that anyone who's thinking about this, I'd encourage them to read, but how they decided which framework they were going to use to build um, their mobile applications in a way that they could use the same code base to a large extent between iOS and Android. It's a decision they made. Yeah.
Where to find that? You said Nubank? I think that's great.
Nubank. Yep. They landed on Flutter is what they decided to use to as a language to get their mobile app built, and that is it's a Flutter framework. The Dart is the language, all built by Google, and they considered React Native, which we've heard of, that just got some bad news, was sunsetted, and a lot of other ideas. And they explained how they weighed the pros and cons of each of these and thought about maintainability, reliability, how easy something is to test, how easy it is to iterate on, and they explained why they landed on Flutter in the end. And that's the kind of decision that has to be made for every single one of the areas of your technology stack. It's called the application architecture. So at Kunai, it's pretty much our most senior people who have seen it all who are involved in application architecture, because you either have to do all this research yourself or you've seen it before and you've already been through this decision making cycle, and you can advise somebody without taking a lot of time, without spending a lot of money. Here is what has been done before, here's what's worked, and here's what hasn't. um, and woe betide the startup founder who spent 3 months grappling with this decision: how do I build my mobile app? And then discovered resources like the Nubank study that I just told you about, right? So that's where, when you're talking to folks about the engineering, how to actually build one of these applications in this area, that domain expertise can be very useful to help you navigate the how do I build it, where do I host it, what languages do I use, what frameworks do I use. Um, and there's trade-offs everywhere. The most important factor when it comes to application development at this point, because of the variety of options you have available, almost any of the major application libraries and languages that are available can be used to write the backends for most of these types of applications securely. All the major cloud providers, you take Azure, you take AWS or Google Cloud Platform, can host your application securely and are relatively easy to learn and or use. And where that leaves you is the number one factor to consider is, who is the team that is likely going to be working on the first version of my application, and what are they comfortable and familiar in? Are they able to work in, say, Java, for example, which doesn't sound too exciting to anybody since the 1990s, but is what the core of a lot of real production scale finance applications and banking cores are written in or work with, or something even more esoteric? Or can you do the bulk of this in JavaScript and Node.js? Is that what's going to get you to market faster, because you are outsourcing all of the hard, complex core work to other companies that could be writing their code in whatever they want? What is the quickest way to test meaningfully that customers want your product in a way that gives them a delightful experience and then lets you maybe pivot down the line?
All amazing stuff, man. It's so much. It's so much to unpack, and I definitely need a second part, because it's so much to unpack in that application architecture process. And I know we went through the user stories, the design, and going into the application process. A quick question,
Yeah.
and just from the audience perspective, what would stop someone from not going from the hybrid approach in terms of the mobile app? Like, why not? Why not get the best of both worlds? I like you to answer that, like from
Yeah,
what
of
you've seen
course.
in the past.
So the idea, the pitch on a mobile application being built in a hybrid form is, I write one code base, it works on both iOS and Android. Why would I write two code bases? That's what people wonder. It's the reason is that there's no real way to write once and run in both places. It's never that simple. You will have branching. These are both mobile platforms that are evolving. Android and iOS are not static. They do different things. They do them in different ways. They expose different APIs. The new versions of their operating system introduce changes all the time. And what happens to any of these hybrid methods? So Adobe supported Cordova, for example. We had React Native coming out of Facebook. What happens is they are forced to diverge over time, and you have to look at, in the abstract, are you going to end up having two code bases anyway for the kind of functionality that you need to use? Or are you really going to be able to have the promise of one? And if you're going to have the promise of one, what are the differences going to be? Can you contain those differences? And are you going to have the flexibility to change things deep in the application itself? And this usually comes up when it comes to performance. Consumer applications in particular have to perform very fast. Every millisecond matters to making sure that your app does better than your competitors. And a lot of the hybrid app technologies, the way that they were built, the way that they were compiling into the code that actually ran on your phones, they were built in such a way that you didn't have granular control over performance. And so one of the reasons why, for example, Nubank said that they decided to go with Flutter is you could get the best of both worlds. You could write most of your application in Flutter, which could, and that code can be used on both platforms. But then you could choose certain parts of the code and you write that in the native language for each of the platforms. So there's some native iOS code or some native Android code blended in with your Flutter code that is running on everything. And it's not easy, the technical depth you need to find the folks who are very, very good at doing this. It's a relatively new set of technologies. It's a deep type of expertise you need. It's just hard to find. And the main reason people don't do it as a matter of course is it just becomes a lot more expensive to find and slow to find the right people who have the expertise you need to do that kind of work and to evaluate, have you even found some to test whether someone is actually capable of doing it. Interviewing people who use newer technologies is a very big challenge. You can make some terrible hiring decisions that can set you back many, many months. We've seen it happen to a lot of companies. And it's a lot easier to hire folks who work in tech stacks that there's a lot more domain knowledge on how to evaluate whether someone is good or not.
Very, very informative. We have to take a second for our sponsor, and then we will close out because we are at time. And I want to get Ruan to talk about his company and also how to find him. So we're going to take a brief moment for our sponsor break, and then we're going to close out.
Are you an emerging fintech with a limited budget seeking more sales and partners? Introducing Strategic Generation, your partner in leveraging cybersecurity for sales and partner enablement. Fintechs often lose opportunities due to unsophisticated cybersecurity programs. That's where we come in. Strategic Generation assists with due diligence, security posture visibility, penetration testing, and on-demand virtual CISO services. We connect your systems to our partnered platform, and voila! Instant access to real-time diagnostics and compliance frameworks such as SOC 2 and PCI DSS. Gain the confidence of prospects and partners. Strengthen your cybersecurity program and drive success. Stop losing deals due to cybersecurity. Visit strategicgeneration.com and click on On-Demand CISO to connect with an expert.
It's the message from our sponsor, Ruan. Amazing episode. Definitely so many jewels, so much information that you dropped. We have to do this again, and I think maybe we take a second part because there's just so much to unpack in the time that I have you, and I want to be respectful of your time. Can you give a closing some advice that the audience can go on, and then afterwards, please tell them how to find you and talk about your company.
Yeah, of course. So anyone who is thinking of starting a company in fintech, I hope we're not dissuading anyone. There's a lot of opportunity out there. There's a lot of really great things that can be done. think of the pitfalls, think of the pros, think of how to avoid the mistakes that have led others to fail, and be thoughtful about how you're going to get to market. Find partners, find co-founders who know what they're doing, who know the space, who you can rely on to make good decisions with you, and give it your best shot. This is a space that needs all the innovation we can get. A little bit about Kunai. Kunai, we are a product development consultancy. We say we work a little better than the largest firms, and we do so faster and a little more candidly, with a deep focus and specialty on financial institutions and fintech. So our customers are the largest payment networks and some of the top banks, and the folks who are trying to disrupt what they do on both sides of the arms race, as it were. We build products, we build apps, we get into the deep cores of banks and banking services, and specialize in every part of that stack that we just talked through in the episode today. You can find us at www.kunai, that's KUNAICO.com, and reach out to us with whatever the impossible vision is that you have that you cannot figure out how to do, and we will help you make it possible.
How can people find you directly?
You can find me on LinkedIn at, the handle is, I think, RUANP is me on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Ruan, thank you very, very much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And you're now officially a friend of the show. We'd love to have you back. We'd like to dive more into the second part of that in terms of the engineering side and the technical details to go to production. And I would love to go back and forth for you because I have some release management experience as well as cybersecurity. So it's supposed to be a really great conversation I'm looking forward to in the future when time is available. And on that note, great stuff. And you enjoy your weekend, and looking forward to talking with you again in the future.
Wait, Nandi. This was great. Thank you so much.
No problem at all. And to our audience, thank you very much for joining. Thank you for viewing. Those on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, and also my people on Instagram, thank you very much for joining. Stay tuned for another episode of the Tech Behind FinTech. We are live every week, Friday, 12 p.m. EST. You can join us then. To all, have a great and exceptional weekend. I will catch you next week, same time, same bat channel. Cheers.
Understanding the technology that powers the money is essential. Knowing the business drivers that inspire how the money is made is crucial. Bridging the gap between the mind of the technologist and the mind of the business is monumental. That is what TBF is all about. Let's start this never-ending conversation. It's time.